Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of crime, justice, and everything in between. This episode is going to be the everything in between kind of thing, okay? I'm your host, JR, and with me today is Alahna McCarron, who has been on previous episodes with me, and she is terrific. Hello again, Alahna.
Hi, JR. Thank you for having me on the podcast, and I look forward to it.
Alahna and I will be chatting with Dr. Joshua Goodwin, a college professor and retired special agent with the United States Air Force. Josh is a co-founder and chief executive officer of Operation True North, LLC, an organization dedicated to providing specialized mental health services to military personnel, first responders, and their families. As a retired Air Force Special Investigations and Counterintelligence Case Officer and Criminal Special Agent, Josh brings over 2 decades of military service and 1,000 days of combat experience to his role. His distinguished service has been recognized with some of our nation's highest honors, including the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and Combat Action Medals that were awarded for his efforts in tracking criminals, spies, and terrorists globally.
Josh teaches criminology at the Chicago School and serves on the Natural Medicine Advisory Board for Colorado. His role on the board is pivotal in shaping policy for the emerging psychedelic therapeutic retreat centers in the state. Josh holds a doctorate in executive leadership, a master's degree in industrial/organizational psychology from Argosy University, and a bachelor's in liberal arts with concentrations in criminal justice and psychology. He is currently pursuing another master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Before you get started, that sounds great. Just want to say one thing. I don't know how hot it is where you're at, Alahna, but it's hotter than a snake's butt in a wagon rut where we're at.
Yeah.
It's hot, that's for sure.
It's hot enough to do a little crotch pot cooking.
For Maine, it's definitely hot.
Well, thanks, everybody. I'm happy to be here. It's always a good time talking, especially, I think it's criminology, right? Criminology students and folks who might want to get in this field. You know, as you kind of mentioned, I was a federal agent for better part of 2 decades. I worked for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which if you don't know what that is, you will know by the end of this. We're kind of the original Men in Black, which is unofficial because that's a fictional organization. And so today I'm going to talk about what it was like working for the original Men in Black. And we're going to talk a little bit about the UFO investigations and Project Blue Book and some of the challenges of hunting aliens from a real life, federal investigative perspective. That's something you see on TV. So, hopefully you find it interesting. You learn something new about a new, small, but really powerful and excellent federal law enforcement organization and counterintelligence organization. And in the end, maybe answer a few questions and we'll make a day of it.
Before you get started, that sounds great. Just want to say one thing. Project Blue Book is, just for some of the listeners out there, it is a project that the Air Force ran back in the day from like the early 1950s, like 51 to up until like 62 or 3 or something like that. So just wanted the listeners to know, and you can actually go find that by simply Googling it. It's all been what we call declassified. So you can take a gander at some of the stuff if you care to follow up on this.
Yeah, they declassified that back in 1975. So, it's been out there for public consumption for a long time. Well, let's talk about, a little bit about the Men in Black, right? What is that? And I get, JR, you and I are getting a little older, right? So Will Smith kind of made that folktale popular, right? When they came out with the movies, I think late 90s or something, about a secret government organization here on Earth that their job was to mitigate extraterrestrial aliens, and while they're here on Earth, and they get into a whole series of adventures. But really the original tale, so back in the 40, 50, 60, that time frame, whenever there was a UFO, shortly after, men would show up in black suits, white shirt, black tie, fedoras, and they started asking strange questions. And in many cases, they would strong arm or through some type of coercion get people to shut their mouth, right? And so this kind of idea of the secret government organization started to come around. And what started to spook people about it was when they showed up, they knew all these things about the people that they were talking to that really they had no idea. Like, how do you know these things about me? Right. And so the kind of folklore took off, especially in that UFO kind of subculture. And so really, those were OSI agents. So we're going to talk about why. So OSI, it used to be the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And so it was founded in 1948. It was suggested by Congress, implemented by this guy named Stuart Symington, who was the first Secretary of the Air Force. It was built and modeled after the FBI. And they brought Special Agent Joseph Carroll, who was the assistant to the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. They brought him over as the first OSI commander, and they made him a one-star general. So FBI agent, popped him into the Air Force, made him a one-star, said, build me an FBI type organization. And at that time, it was like a J. Edgar Hoover type organization, right? These guys were shady. They were doing all kinds of stuff. They didn't care about any laws or anybody's privacy rights. And it was a mixture. It would become a mixture of like the CIA and the FBI. It has about 3,000 agents. So it started out as the Office of Special Investigations. Then it went to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And now that the Space Force has stood up, it is back to the Office of Special Investigations because now agents provide those services for both Air Force and Space Force, right? So we're doing a lot. There's about 3,000 agents. 2,000 of them are military and civilians. 1,000 of them are like National Guard. We have 1,000 professional staff. So like admin and personnel people and operational psychologists and all kinds of stuff. We have about 400 reservists. We operate about 300 locations around the world, and we're headquartered out of Quantico, Virginia. And what's cool about this is, when I was there, I didn't know anything about this. I'd never heard of OSI. There's a lot of organizations like that. Some people are more familiar with NCIS, which is OSI's kind of sister service because of the TV show. But there are so many really cool small federal agencies out there that are just doing amazing work. For example, the Park Service has federal agents. A lot of people don't know that. So if there's a felony crime that happens on a national park or someone gets murdered, those federal agents go out and do that. The railroad police have their own federal agents. There's about 40 or 50 of those. So there's these little small federal agencies that have very specific missions, and they do these really cool things. So other than just big FBI or CIA or some of those big things that we hear about, there's a lot of these little ones out there that are just doing amazing work. And I like to do talks like this because it allows us to highlight some of those and gets people to kind of open their aperture when they're looking at what kind of career they want down the road. There's a lot out there, and people are doing just amazing things using that same fundamental investigative or criminal law enforcement skill set, but they're doing it in really, really cool ways.
I just want to add in that in our previous episode on Criminology Chats, episode 12, it says, in the headlines there that we talked with Johnny Gershing, which is an FBI agent, retired FBI agent, but actually the case he talks about, he worked with one of those National Park federal agents, special agent, on a case.
That's really cool.
So that's when I first learned actually about there are special agents in some of those smaller organizations. So who kind of fits right in now. Right.
Yeah. And Jerry, you did that. You did like Army, the Army CID version, right?
Yep.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that too. Well, so let's talk about OSI. So what are its mission sets? First, threat detection. So from hostile intelligence services and terrorists through espionage, terrorism, technology transfer, computer infiltration, right? We're a mixture of FBI, CIA, but our job is to keep the airfield green so that we can project air power into the world. And so as part of that, we are federal law enforcement agents. We go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia. We're 1811 federal agents. We fly armed. We do everything that every other federal law enforcement agency does. We have a very specific mission, and that is to help project that air power in the war. To do that, we do criminal investigations as well. So all felony level criminal investigations, rape, murder, fraud, child molestation, terrorism, arson, right? It's all kinds of stuff. It's wild. We do economic crimes. So fraud, basically contracting, so if some contractor charges us $2 million for a widget that cost him $20,000 and you didn't give us what we ordered and that kind of thing, we go after them. And what's interesting about OSI is that we're one of the only federal law enforcement organizations that pays for itself every year in the money we return from fraud investigations. We get more money back than it costs to have us. So pound for pound, we're a pretty heavy and effective weapon system. We have an entire suite of specialized services, which is where I spent most of my time. So we have technical, like tech agents who break into places and put in cameras and wiretaps and cell phone stuff and all that wild stuff. We have polygraphers, behavioral scientists, computer experts, forensic advisors. We have counter espionage. That's what I did. So I was a spy, and we'll talk more about that. And then we sit over the Defense Cybercrime Center. So we're a part of that. Navy and everyone's got some cyber folks there, but down in San Antonio, there's a big cyber center, and OSI is a big hub of that. So we're really anything that has to do with threats, that has anything to do with the military, especially the Air Force, but really anyone, we're involved in it. And what's cool about it is when you talk about federal law enforcement, you talk about jurisdiction. Or let's start with like state and local. Police, sheriff's departments, they can operate within their state, their counties, but they're kind of limited to those boundaries. FBI is supposed to be stateside only, although they do have people stationed around the world that they run leads, and they're running that stateside mission, but they have fingers around the world, kind of helping push information around. CIA is supposed to be overseas only, but again, they've got fingers here that they could do some stuff, but jurisdictionally, they kind of have their lanes in the road. For us, anywhere in the globe is on limit. It's as long as there's a military nexus, we can be there and we can operate with our full authority. Whether that's Japan, it's the Middle East, it's in the ocean, it does not matter. If there is a military nexus in any way, we have a full green light to play there, which makes it pretty cool. During my career, I traveled to over 40 countries and got to work in all of them, and it was amazing. So when you talk about OSI, and we're going to talk about the UFO thing, but when you see us in the news, you're going to see terrorism stuff in the war. You're going to see us catching spies. You're going to see us proving fraud from contractors, returning tons of money. You're going to see us stopping human trafficking. You're going to see us stopping child molesters and rapists. You're going to see us catching serial killers or murderers and all kinds of different things. And we have agents doing all of those things. And so for us, we all start out of FLETC. We're on probation for 18 months. And, you have to get signed off all the tasks. I'm sure you guys had to do a JR, and pretty much every law enforcement does. You have to go to autopsies and do crime scene stuff and, the whole thing. But once you finish that, then you have the opportunity to determine whether you want to stay in criminal investigations, whether you want to go to counterintelligence, whether you want to do one of the specialty tracks, or you can kind of bounce back and forth. It's really just an amazing organization. And so whatever your interest is in terms of federal law enforcement, OS has it and you can do it. And it's pretty great like that. So let's talk about Project Blue Book and really how OSI got involved. So I'm going to give you a little timeline of events, and then we'll break down what that's like from the law enforcement side. So in June 1947, a civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 flat saucers approaching Mount Rainier in Washington. That's where we get the term flying saucer from, right? So this is June 1947. They never seen anything like this. I think, when did we get airplanes? 33 or something like that. So it was pretty wild at that time. In the mid 47s, like mid 1947, there was a flood of additional sightings, including reports from military, civilian pilots, air traffic controllers from all over the United States were seeing these things. And this technology was something we'd never seen before. And again, at that time, we're probably still in like the single prop airplane and maybe dual prop airplane kind of stage of our flight existence. So we weren't even close to anything like this. In July of 47, we have the crash at Roswell. Elena, you ever heard of that? Are you familiar with this crash? Okay.
I have never heard of that.
So, that is the keystone when it comes to UFO culture. We thought that there was an alien crash in Roswell, New Mexico, or the saucer crashes, and all of these rumors start to fly. Well, it turns out it was not. It was a secret atomic experiment that we were doing, the Air Force was doing. So the Soviets were working on the atomic bomb at the time. And when they were like detonating their kind of early versions of it, it would send all these particles into the air. And so at Area 51, we created a weather balloon system out of classified technologies. And it was basically Mylar. And so like a happy birthday balloon, like if you went to the store and you saw those happy birthday balloons, that's Mylar. And then what was basically a plastic that we see in Nalgene water bottles today. Okay, but this is 1947. They had never seen anything like that. They had seen, wood, burlap, metal. So we had this thing and it would go up into the atmosphere and it would capture all these particles. And then we could see how far along they were in the bomb making process. Well, that thing crashed and they found it and they were like, this thing is made of materials not of this earth, which wasn't exactly true. It was of this earth. It was just nothing they'd seen because we created it at Area 51 under these special projects. And so then you start to get the secret agents showing up because we have this secret technology. And so at first, the Air Force allows people to believe it was an alien crash because they didn't want our atomic secret to get out. And in fact, this remained classified till probably the late 90s because we were still using that technology. We can do that stuff with satellites and all kinds of stuff now. But back then, like even in the late 90s, we still had to send those balloons up. So this whole thing was classified. And so people just would not stop believing that this alien thing crashed. And in fact, they teach this at military deception schools now about lessons learned. So it turns out that people can't handle a secret, right? So when we released the F-22 Raptor, we put it on T-shirts, we put it on posters, it was on commercials. And we were like, look, we got the biggest, baddest airplane, fighter jet that's ever been made. This thing it can fly higher, faster. It can see a bad guy, shoot it, and turn around and leave before the bad guy even knows it's there. And for like 99% of the population, that was good enough. Oh, okay. We got this really great fighter plane. Cool. And they would even put it on display at air shows. They would just cover the sensors and the things that made it so special. Exactly how high and how fast and, how deadly the weapon systems were. Those were a secret, but the fact that we had it wasn't. And so because we realized and we learned all the way back to this crash in Roswell that just holding a secret like that, it just doesn't work. So anyway, once it started to get out of hand, people started to panic. Man, it was like War of the Worlds kind of deal. Like radio's going off and everyone's getting spooked. And so the Air Force comes back and they're like, no, this is not aliens. It was just a weather balloon. And no one believed it. So it goes on. 1948, the Air Force assigns this guy named General Nathan Twining, who is the head of the Air Technical Service Command. And he established this thing called Project Sign. And it was the first official UFO investigation. And its mission was to collect, collate, evaluate, and distribute within the government all information related to sightings of UFOs. So Project Sign takes off. OSI doesn't exist yet. I think it's like 48 is when they built OSI. So about the same time, they hand it to this guy. 49, OSI has its legs underneath it. It takes over the UFO investigation, but it's called Project Grudge in the beginning. And they basically task all detachments at the time to take reports on UFOs. But the one at District 17, which is Kirkland, New Mexico, right outside of Area 51, shockingly, was doing the most work. And because they were getting UFO sightings all the time. So in April 49, the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board recommends a temporary observation post northeast of Albuquerque on the crest of the Sandia Mountains, based on evidence gathered by District 17. Because there's like 12,000 UFO reports coming out, all right? And there are a lot of them in New Mexico. And at the time, Area 51, we did not talk about that at all, right? I was talking about that doesn't exist. So even though we knew there was a secret base where we had all this secret technology coming from, these science nerds were like, there's a lot of UFOs over here. We're like, okay, sure, we'll stand up this thing. But it turns out most of those sightings were us, like early B-2 stealth flights, SR-71, all of our, high-end Air Force stuff. They were our airplanes that were being spotted by these people thinking they were UFOs. That's why OSI showed up, because we do research technology protection. So from 49 to 50, UFO investigations are intense, but they're inconclusive. OSI presents findings and consults with Sandia, Los Alamos, University of California Geophysics Institute, the Atomic Energy Commission, and all other agencies. Because even though a big number of these sightings were us and we knew it, a lot of them weren't. And we didn't know what they were. And so at the time, we were like, is this some type of enemy aircraft or surveillance platform, right? Is this the Soviets? Like, who is doing this? Chinese? Like, who are they, especially around our Area 51 base where all these UFO sightings were? We were concerned that our enemies were targeting us, which is, again, why OSI was on the ground. In 1951, Project Blue Book begins. And this is when OSI kind of revises its information in detail. Because early on, we would show up a lot of them would be us, but a lot of them were just crazy people. People were just crazy, like they were crazy back then, they're crazy today. And they would think that they saw little green men and aliens, and agents would go out there, and this would be like the 16th time the same crazy ass farmer had called them. And they're like, all right, what's going on? So they got a little smarter. They start revising the information that they're looking for. They change the detail of the reports they're getting. They start to do background investigations on people before they go out. So John Smith, the farmer, they'll start pulling all of his records and everything before they go out to do the interview to see if he's been, had mental health issues or been in an asylum or, been in trouble with the law. That's why when they showed up, they knew all these things about people, right? Because they just got tired of being led astray by crazy folks. So it wasn't anything shady other than just good old fashioned police work. But they really started to focus in on like flight tactics, maneuvers, direction of travel, really anything they could to discover, to look for patterns, right? What can we learn about these things? In 1967, agents briefed a scientific group on neutron activity analysis, and they sent a piece of an alleged UFO craft to an FBI crime lab. Someone claimed there was a UFO crash. They found a piece of it. They sent it to a lab. The lab concludes that like the atom was unusual. They didn't know what it was, but there was no evidence that it belonged to an alien craft or that it was even made of things that aren't on this world. They didn't know what it was, but they're like, it's weird, but we don't know what it is, right? I think everything in it could be found on our periodic table. That's the bottom line, but they don't know how it got put together. How? In 1969, they wrap up Project Blue Book. In total, there were 12,618 sightings, and 701 of them remained unidentified, which is interesting. Okay. Meaning the other 12,000, we knew what they were. They're either us, a bad guy, a bird, some kind of weird atmospheric event or something. But there were 700 of them that were legit UFO sightings that we just don't know what they are. And so their findings came out, and this is interesting. They basically say three major findings. One, there's no indication of threats to U.S. national security. Two, there's no evidence of unexplained advanced technology. And three, there's no evidence that reports were of extraterrestrial vehicles. That was a finding of Project Blue Book. And this is where it gets weird, right? Because they recently released to the public, you guys probably know that UFOs are real, right? The government has come out and acknowledged like these things are real and we don't know what they are. And the reason I like to do this talk from a federal law enforcement perspective is to talk about how difficult it is to actually determine if something is extraterrestrial or not. Right? Because in this line of work, it is not what you know, it's what you can prove. And if you look at the findings of Blue Book, they all start with no evidence of. They don't say they're not extraterrestrial. They don't say they're national, not a national security threat. They're just saying we couldn't find evidence of it. And when you look, and I wish we could, do this where people could see the slideshow, but I pulled some of the original Blue Book reports. And it's like date, time. There's some grainy photos of like 3 discs against the blue sky. And they show up and some farmer's like, yep, hovered here. And then it just went that way and blooped out of existence. Okay. Well, what do you do with that? Okay. So there were 3 flying saucers that blooped out of existence. Like, okay, did you get a good clear photo of it? Did it crash? Did some little green man pop out and be like, hey, I'm Bob from Mars? No, none of those things happened. Well, we don't know. And even if you did get a photo of it, and let's say there were some weird alien symbols on, if you go down to like Meow Wolf here in Denver, or like, or you go to Universal Studios, like some of those rides, humans can create weird looking languages and put them on things. And military does this stuff for military deception all the time. So just because there is some weird writing or weird markings on it doesn't mean our enemy didn't do it as, some way to cover it. And so again, unless it crashes or lands and some green man pops out and he's like, hey, I'm Bob from Mars, you don't know what it is, right? And so from a federal law enforcement perspective, especially if you're reputable, if you don't have evidence, you can't say that that's what this is, and so that it's so difficult. And when you start looking at some of the stories, and I have to be very careful here about what I say, but the technology of these things are unlike anything we've ever seen. I mean, I'm talking, they're so fast, we can't keep up with them. They'll just bloop out of existence, like literally just vanish. Or I've heard a story, I'd be very careful here, about a country who is not us, who one of these things are like flying over their space, their airspace. And because they're dumbasses, they decide to shoot it down. And as soon as like they target this thing, it just turns them off. And then bloops out of existence. Like they didn't even know their planes could be shut down like that. I mean, just literally the pilots ejected, they landed safely, but the UFO and the UFO is non-aggressive, until they tried to shoot it down. And then it was like, nope, just blooped it out and then gone. And so, they've done things like, mess with nuclear weapon silos. One, we didn't even know were capable. We don't have the technology at all. And they're just so far advanced. We just don't know what they are. So kind of some of the final thoughts here on Project Blue Book. The National Archives, they've been unable to locate any documentation amongst the Project Blue Book stuff that discussed the 47 incident in Roswell. So like the Air Force didn't even look into it back then because we knew what it was already. And so they wanted to do this whole investigation because no one believed that there wasn't an alien crash in Roswell. So then there was a whole congressional manhunt about this thing. And so they did a whole study and they ended up popping out saying, hey, the Air Force research did not locate or develop any information that Roswell incident was a UFO event, nor was there any indication of a cover-up by the government. Materials recovered near Roswell was consistent with a balloon device of the type used in a then classified project. No records indicated or even hinted that the recovery of alien bodies or extraterrestrial materials were recovered. So I think all that to say that when you're talking about federal law enforcement, when you're talking about OSI, when you're talking about Men in Black, I think it's a really interesting example of how rumor and people just making assumptions and putting things together can just get really out of hand, right? And I actually met some old scientists from that time. And I was on a cruise ship and there was one who was like, he retired in 1969. And he was like, man, those damn fedoras, they made us wear them. And I kept leaving them on airplanes. Like, I hated those things. And like, you would get in trouble if you didn't have one. He's like, I must have bought 20 of them over the years because I just kept losing them and stuff. And so even back then, they were just complaining about uniforms. And they made them wear those black suit, white shirt, black ties, so they all look the same. And I think on the witness side, it seems very ominous and scary. Someone shows up, knows all the stuff about them. But when you start looking at it, it's very practical, right? Just, we're tired of talking to crazy people. Wait a minute. I'm not going out to Farmer John's house again. I've been there 16 times. This dude's just crazy. And then really just trying to maximize their time and effort. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
And I think, too, when it comes to the fact that whenever they looked in the National Archives and they couldn't find any investigation about the crash because we already knew what it was. So why do we investigate something we know what it already is? Then all conspiracy theories abound then. Well, the government obviously has covered up something. There must have been an alien in that particular crash because you can't find any evidence where they even investigated it. Well, we couldn't tell them at the time that, well, we knew what it was and it was classified and we couldn't tell you. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that goes on. That's true.
Dude, there's so much. I mean, even the China, remember that spy balloon that flew all the way across America and everyone was like, oh my God, I can't believe we haven't shot it down and we're so weak and blah, blah, blah. It's because we were exploiting it, man.
Exactly.
We have, secret people doing secret stuff. Just shut up and let them do their job. I promise you, everyone sees the same thing you're doing and that there are people smarter than us out there just doing their job. Right. And I just think it's interesting, really.
After I retired from being a special agent, I worked for the National Reconnaissance Office. And I can't tell you a lot, but I can tell you it's amazing what that organization can do.
Yeah, same for us, man. The technology, they do a lot of research technology protection, right? So, we don't do anything spooky to Area 51 anymore because everyone knows about it. But that doesn't mean there's not 6 other of those. And our whole job is protecting those secrets and that kind of budding technology and all those things that come out. And it's just wild, the things that humans are capable of. I mean, our technology, it's pretty interesting.
Do you think they'll ever fully disclose everything that was known about Area 51 and all these little hidden underground alien places?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, no, not really. I mean, when they say the individual's smart, but the mass is stupid, and we've learned this, sometimes the old ways are the best ways, right? And some things. So sometimes you got to go back to some of the old ways. And so if it's really not beneficial to release it, then you might as well just kind of keep it a secret until it's a problem because you might need it again. Or you don't want to give it to one of your neighboring, countries. And so they start then developing those things. And so sometimes it's better just to keep those things where they are, I think. I mean, just from what I've seen. What do you think, JR?
Yeah, I do too. You talk about the old ways of doing things. Like, for example, Josh probably knows more about this than I do, but in our intelligence gathering apparatuses, they have went back now, and you can read this in books because a lot of it's been declassified. They go back now to doing things because of electronics and everything, and you can trace a lot of stuff now through your phone, through electronics, back to kind of the old school of communicating with people, where they have such things as dead drops now again and things of that nature. And what a dead drop is let's say this has all been prearranged, and the one entity has went out and say in a wood somewhere, and they have planted a box or something in the ground, and they have, and it's at a certain location. And then you have somebody that has intelligence, and they will go out there and drop it in this box. Okay. And then they'll make a mark on a sign or something. And then you'll come by in a day or two, see a mark, and there's intelligence in there. And then you'll go there after a day or two and get the intelligence and leave them and make another mark on a different sign. And that is, you think that's crazy, but it's hard to catch that. Okay. And they won't have their phone with them. Trace their phone. We can say their phone is hanging off a tower right near there. So what were you doing there? So there's a lot of that stuff that now is going back to the old way of doing things. I'm not saying it's all that way, but I'm just saying a lot of times you go back that way, it's harder to catch someone. The first thing, what do we do? The first thing is a criminal investigator, and we know we got a suspect in a case. One of the first things we do is get a warrant for their phone, and we ask for the data on their phone, their text, the locations, and all that, then we have to decipher it. But that's one of the first things we do.
It's like they say, man, with enough time, energy, and resources, there is no technology that we can't crack. Like they're going to get through it eventually. It just depends on how bad they want you. And so, but you can't crack, an old soup can and a trash can that's got some handwritten instructions, like you just can't crack it. And so it is a perfect example. And, that reminded me, and I forgot to say this, like, I did not do UFO investigations. So I want to make that clear. Like, I was doing counter-espionage stuff. So I was a case officer. And so they take about 80 of us, and we're trained more like the CIA. And so I'd go behind enemy lines and build human informant networks and put them in terror cells and work with special forces, get them killed and captured and all that kind of stuff. But OSI does not do UFO investigations anymore. And really, I don't think there's any organization that does that. So there is a group like at the Pentagon who collates that data, and there's like analysts. And so if something weird like that does happen, say like a UFO were to go over and like turn off a nuclear silo in Europe or some shit, like OSI would go out, they would gather the information, and then they would submit that to that unit, or up at the Pentagon who's just collating and looking for patterns. No one is, I think, wasting money on just doing that, right? There's no single organization. It's like there's no organization out there hunting Bigfoot or the chupacabra or any other cryptid or whatever, right? Like maybe if the Park Service federal agents come across one, then they'll deal with it. Like if Bigfoot comes down and starts trying to kick some ass, then there's some federal agent at the Park Service who's got to deal with that. But until that happens, like there's no Bigfoot hunting agency. And the same thing with UFO. Like, I mean, if it falls in somebody's jurisdiction, then they'll deal with it as it comes. Other than that, I don't think from what I know, there's no one looking at it like that. Other than, again, analysts and stuff, or, they're taking pilot data or radar stuff or, whatever, satellite info. Like, I mean, they're collating data. I mean, I think they're looking at it from a brainy nerd kind of perspective.
Explain to our listeners what you mean by, as much as you can explain, what a case officer is.
You have detective or investigator or special agent when it comes to like federal law enforcement. Case officer is that term for an intelligence operative or a spy, right? And so typically you hear that most with like CIA, but basically all the branches have intelligence assets and double agent work and all kinds of super secret spy stuff. Say Border Patrol, DEA, ATF, OSI, CID, we all use the same skills, but we're using them against our own bad guys. It's the same way for us. So, we get trained as spies and we leverage all of those intelligence and espionage skills against foreign enemies and, domestic enemies. So we're really trying to stop kinetic attacks, sabotage, espionage, terrorism, those sort of things. And we use that typically by running informants, so we're like, there's a book called Spy Master, like Kalugan. That's one term that they use, but you're basically the handler of spies, right? So you recruit some informant, you train them, you send them off to do some secret stuff, you come back. So you're kind of that's why they call it a case officer. You're like managing all aspects of it. You're the budgeting, all the external components that are going along with the operation. You're handling the asset, you're coordinating polygraph and tech agents, and you're flying around the world doing all kinds of spooky spy stuff.
Some more questions, Alahna? Does that spawn any thought process there or anything? Is that the right word I use there, spawn? Or should that, it's more like a fish?
With the whole spy thing, true, like when like agents are spies, like they can't go home and talk about it at all. Like they just have to live some sort of double life. Like there's somebody when they're at work, but there's somebody at home.
It depends, right? So there are levels, right, where people are undercover, so they have terms for that. I probably won't say them on here, but basically they work some other kind of day job. The fact that they are employed by an intelligence agency is unknown to anybody. That is a top tier level of espionage work, but it's very small. It's like special forces versus conventional army. Maybe there's 2 million conventional army and maybe there's 20,000 special forces. It's the same way with that level of espionage. And then the rest of us are more like it's open. Like my family knew what I did. I didn't talk about specifics. They knew the type of work I was doing, but I wasn't like, I'm in Afghanistan hunting whatever, this bad guy in this area because he did these things. I couldn't talk about that. It was typically 3 things that made it classified. It was like location, country, and then, names. Like, so you couldn't get into any of those things. Yeah. And there are a lot of people who live those kind of lives who don't even do the direct work. There's support for the folks who do that direct work, but it just like keeps them clean. So they don't like get the person who's actually doing that work dirty. And so it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
that whole life is cool.
So I guess a question for both of you. When I heard we were talking about like Project Blue Book and probably Area 51, do either of you believe in the whole extraterrestrial alien from another planet thing?
I definitely do. What about you, JR?
Well, I have said in the past that I don't know. And I know that's kind of a cop-out. I'm one of those guys that has to see it and believe it. So, you can say they're out there. It's like obtaining evidence. You can say that's a criminal and that's the head of a mafia family. But until you can prove that's the head of the mafia family and they're doing those things, do I think they are out there? Sure, maybe. But you got to prove to me they're out there. That's the thing.
They're real. I mean, they're real. And I have been around where they have caused us problems. Like it wasn't my problem. Like I was in a room talking to somebody about some spy shit and UFOs cause some other people problems. And so, I've seen some stuff that like, hey, it's definitely real. I have a theory of what I think they are. And this is not, I guess, informed by anything that I've seen classified. It's just, it makes the most sense to me. But before I say what it is, Alahna, I want to know what you think.
I feel like I'm more towards, like, I have to see it to believe it. Same thing with, like, paranormal, but I definitely feel like could be a very real thing, just simply because of what you have said and what I've read. I mean, technologies that we aren't, like, we're not even there yet. And when you were talking about random aircraft just shut down, like the other one, and then blooped off and was gone, it's almost going like the speed of light, I guess, would be my biggest thing. So, I mean, I think they definitely could be out there, but I think I would have to see it to truly believe it.
Yeah, I mean, they're like, they've been spotted coming up out of the oceans and then taking off, and like all kinds of, which probably where they're hiding. Makes sense, right? Because there's so much of the Earth's oceans we haven't explored yet. So here's what I think. And again, it just makes sense to me. And this is nothing I've seen. It's not informed by anything. So I don't want anyone to, if they finally do show up and they get it wrong, I don't want to be like, this dude didn't know what he's talking about, because I really don't. But here's what makes the most sense to me is that they're probably us. I think probably humans are already interstellar. to some degree, and that it just takes too much energy to move mass amounts of people from planet to planet. And so like when I did that 23andMe back in the day, it says like they were talking about how everyone alive today can be tracked back to like 12 people, in Africa, like a few 100,000 years ago or something. And they said on that app that like there's probably thousands of people alive today, but these are the only bloodlines that have made it this far. But it also sounds kind of like a landing party to me, right? So like maybe what they do is they go and they seed some planet and then they just let humans naturally grow. And that these UFOs are maybe like drones, right? Because they move so fast. According to our physics, biologics can't survive. Like they turn so fast and they're going so fast. So either they got some technology that allows them to do that, or there's no living creatures in it. It's just some drone collecting data because they have not been aggressive towards us. They really are most interested in world-ending technologies. They're spotted a lot around nuclear weapons. Anytime we're messing with anything that can really wipe off our whole planet, you're seeing a lot of that UFO activity. Like I said, even in that case that I told you about, they didn't hurt them. They were doing their thing and they were like, you're not hurting me. And then, but they still parachuted to safety. So like, maybe they just keep a tab on the evolving situation. Right. And because it takes so long to travel through the stars, we just haven't seen it. Like they came here, they did it, they moved on, and then they just keep tabs. That's what makes the most sense to me. I don't know if it's true. Maybe they're just like humans are the aliens.
Hey, that's as good an explanation as anybody else has, right?
Yeah, because we don't know.
Exactly.
Maybe somebody knows. I don't know. Not me.
Not I either. I have no idea. Cool.
Well, I appreciate you asking some questions, but if you'll allow me, I'll just do a quick takeaway, man. I think if there's anything I'd like you to take away from this talk today, it's that there are a ton of small, amazing federal law enforcement agencies and counterintelligence and intelligence agencies out there that are just doing amazing stuff. And so if you're going to school for any of these kind of, forensic psychology or criminology or any of those things, get out of your head about police departments, FBI or CIA. Those are cool, but there are so many other really just great organizations out there doing things. And the other thing is just to remember that it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And the challenge of being an investigator is finding the evidence, right? What does the evidence tell you? Because until you can paint that picture with the evidence, it doesn't matter what you know or what you can believe. And so that's what makes this life and this job and this career field so interesting. And so I hope you all got something from it.
Sure did. So that was pretty interesting, don't you think?
Oh, my word. We thank Dr. Goodwin for being here today and chatting about such interesting topics.
Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who participated in this episode.
We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at crimpodcast@thechicagoschool.edu. That's CRIMPODCAST at the Chicago CHICAGO School SCHOOL.edu.
This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'd like to give a special shout out to her because if it wasn't for her, this episode and all episodes would not be possible. So thank you so much, Amy. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, your host, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers or the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers or the Chicago School.